I'm here at the Energy Institute to meet its new boss to discuss how he will oversee a transition. The Energy Institute is more than 100 years old. Its members come from generally the oil and gas sector. But the oil and gas sector is about to change. It has to change as we all transition to net zero. So how will he take his members on this journey? Should the Energy Institute listen to what members want, or should it lead? And what does it all mean for all of us as we transition to net zero? These are the things we'll be discussing in our conversation. Nick, thank you for joining me and giving us your time today.
Sumit, it's lovely to be here with you.
Who is Nick Wayth? Who are you? How did you end up in this situation? Tell us a little bit about your history.
A big question to start the day. So I have been involved in the energy industry for the last 25 years of my life. Having studied a degree in mechanical engineering, I went on to do a PhD, which was sponsored by BP, Statoil as then was, and Caverna as then was, where I spent 3 years in a lab separating out water and oil emulsions. And from that, I joined BP in 1999. You may recall, back in 99, the oil price had just hit $10, so it was a pretty tough time. And I then spent the next 22 years having a fantastic career in BP, working everywhere from the North Sea through to Algeria, spending some time in commercial roles. I spent time in investor relations, both here in the UK and in the United States. I ran competitor intelligence for 3 years. And then for the last 4.5 years of my career at BP, I led the strategy, the technology, and the business development for our renewables business.
So you started off as a scientist and an engineer, but then you floated into different roles then?
Absolutely, and I think, I'm glad to have trained as an engineer. I'm a fellow of the IPweek, and I guess engineering has always been associated with my role. But actually, I've always enjoyed learning about the big picture around the energy sector. To me, early on in my career, standing on a platform on the Forties field in the North Sea, just realizing that those barrels of oil were going through onto the mainland, being refined, going into people's cars, gave me a real sense of the scale and the impact of the energy industry. And so I've been fortunate enough to have a very diverse and interesting career in different parts of the energy industry, and understanding, at least to some extent, the scale and how the different parts of the energy industry interconnect.
What made you change tack and leave BP then?
So I'd been there a long time, and I guess personally, like a lot of people, the lockdown was a chance to reflect on priorities. And I was sort of at that point where I either stay and probably serve out the entirety of my career in one company, or I think about doing something different. I'd also spent a lot of the last 5 years really thinking about how BP played into the transition, both in my most recent job at BP, but also in the role beforehand when I was running competitor intelligence, looking at how the energy majors were playing into the transition. And arguably the work of companies like BP and Shell is only just beginning on the energy transition. But for me, I'd spent sort of 5 years really being deeply involved in how BP addressed that challenge. And in some respects, that change had begun to happen. And so to take on a new challenge had a real amount of appeal to me.
Why the Energy Institute?
So I looked at a number of opportunities, as you would imagine, and I think what appealed to me about the Energy Institute was the fact that it sits across the breadth of the energy industry. It's I'm passionate about energy, I'm passionate about renewables, I'm passionate about oil and gas, all forms of energy, and the Energy Institute has it all. I also really liked the fact that it had this unbiased, fact-based approach. It wasn't trying to push a particular technology. And I think that's really important. And so that legacy that had been built up with that credibility. And I met members of the team, and I have to say I was deeply impressed with the team that I inherited from Louise. So very happy to be here.
It's a big thing though to change. I used to work for the BBC many years ago, and then I went by myself and freelance, and here we are with Energy Live News and Future Net Zero. For you to go sort of, one company as a young man, grow up there, do all your career there, and then suddenly change, not to another company, but completely different sector, to a member organisation. Could you just explain, because that to me seems quite a big jump. You might have gone, oh, actually, I'll go to Shell, or I'll go somewhere else. I'll go and join a renewable company. Why that particular thing in lockdown that made you realise I want to do something different?
I think, so firstly, Shell's a great company.
Yeah.
But there's probably not much point after 22 years jumping from BP to Shell and being in a similar sort of environment. But I think secondly, there's an element of actually questioning in yourself. You've
right.
created a career,
yeah.
You've been very successful in one company, you've had an amazing time, and part of you thinks, well, can I replicate that success elsewhere? Can I be successful outside of the comfort blanket and the network I've got within a company like BP? And actually, I want to put that to the test and see if I can. It's early days yet, so I'm not declaring success or anything near like that at the moment. But I think there was part of me that wanted to prove I could do something outside of that sort of support structure.
Yeah. So what is the Energy Institute to you? So obviously, it's been there for more, I think 100 years or more than that, yeah. So, and clearly energy meant oil and gas, okay? And we all know what's happening. But as you sit now as the boss of this organisation, what does it mean to you? What do you see after 3 months in charge?
I think, first and foremost, we are a membership organisation. We have 20,000 members around the world, a lot of those based in the UK. But I think our role in development and training of the current generation, but also future generations of the energy sector is critical. And and that only increases as we enter into the energy transition.
Yeah.
I think secondly, the direction of travel around net zero in my mind, is no longer a debate. We are heading towards net zero, and the question is not if, it's a question of how fast we get there. And I think the role we can play in helping industry really pull together around some of the standards and practices that we need to create in order to be successful. So when I look at what we do across the EI in terms of our good practices, today we're active across many aspects of the hydrocarbon industry as we have been for many decades, but increasingly we see ourselves playing into areas such as offshore wind safety through the G+ program, into areas such as carbon capture and storage and hydrogen and so on. And I think that role we can play in helping the industry develop the best practices to allow us to develop new forms of energy safely and efficiently is going to be absolutely critical. And the last point to me is around that sort of trusted, unbiased point of view where we can convene the industry, we can create a safe space and pull together, a direction for the industry to play into.
But that's an interesting point, because as you say, you've got members, right, who are, you said majority probably UK, but you've got a lot of international members. I don't know if you know, off the top of your head, what sort of percentage you'd say are working in what would be considered the traditional oil and gas sector. I assume it's quite the majority. So these people have careers like you've had. They are now facing a transition. Some, maybe all of them are finding that's fine, but some may struggle with that. Is it the job of the Energy Institute to lead members towards this transition, or is it the job of the Institute to just listen to what the members want? Because some people, let's face it, in India and China, Australia, dare I say, there's a lot of people still see a lot of value in oil and gas and see great careers there and don't think there's any reason to change. So you might find different pressures, that's what I'm trying to get at, from areas of your membership of which direction you want to go. Do you see yourself being neutral?
I think we can be neutral. I think we can lead, and I think we absolutely have to listen to our members.
Isn't that a contradiction, to be neutral and lead?
I don't think it is. I think the direction around net zero, as I said before, is absolutely, that in my mind is certain. I might be wrong. I hope I'm not wrong, but I'm convinced. Yeah. And therefore, the Energy Institute needs to play into that direction. I think there's sometimes a portrayal around a divergence in the energy sector. You've got, old energy and new energy. In my mind, we're actually seeing energy converge. As we think about new value chains, and today the UK government published its plan around hydrogen, as we think about vectors such as hydrogen actually, we've now got molecules of gas going into molecules of hydrogen, potentially going into power creating hydrogen, and suddenly value chains that up until this point were largely separate are actually integrating. The skills we see in the oil and gas sector have a huge amount to offer into renewables, as indeed the skills in the renewables industry playing into oil and gas. So to me, this isn't about sort of divergence, it isn't about separating the industry, it's about converging, bringing people together, helping people understand how their skills and knowledge, that may have been developed over many decades in oil and gas is highly, highly relevant into the renewable sector. And I've seen that play out through my own experiences at BP. And I personally believe the Energy Institute has a huge opportunity and a huge role to play in helping those people make that transition in terms of the skills they need to be successful.
Now, I knew Louise very well, your predecessor, 20 years, and we were very frank, and she said, when she joined, it was an institution of old duffers who, just had this view of where things were, and she did shake it up over her 20 years. She made it more international. What are you going to do to the Energy Institute? What do you want to do?
So I'm firstly very grateful for the fantastic organisation that Louise has left. It's a wonderful team, and I couldn't be happier to lead the team. I think in terms of where we're going next, where we've just embarked on a strategy review, and the whole team across the EI, as well as our council, as well as other stakeholders, are engaged in that process. And I think in many respects, setting out what the world looks like in 2030 is going to be really important in terms of how we frame, where we focus our attention. To me, the convergence of energy will be a continual theme. I also think, and you questioned on this before, we need to be at the forefront. We need to be leading this transition. And I know Louise has talked about this, so I'm not saying anything that she wouldn't say. I think there was a little bit of trepidation as the Energy Institute pivoted. And I don't think we should be scared or nervous about moving too fast too soon. We need to do it in a systematic way. We need to bring our members, our team, our other stakeholders with us on that journey. But I don't think we should be afraid about really stepping forward and leading. In terms of sort of the actual choices we'll make, I think it's too early to say, but I know that we'll continue to be relevant for all of the energy industry. I know that our global presence will continue to be important to us. And the question really is within that, where do we sort of focus our major efforts?
Let's talk about a couple of things that the EI is famous for. Obviously, the training, the education of people out there. And I think there's a feeling when I've talked to some of your international members, which I have, that it's still seen as a sort of a gold standard to be a member and to assign to that. But then there's the second part about, as I said, old duffers, changing, diversity, all of that. Let's take those two things. Let's talk about education and what you want to do with the EI for people who are in the industry. And what are you going to do about kind of shifting the sector, dare I say, away from engineers, because we'll need a variety of different people coming in. We'll need different backgrounds coming in. Let's take those two things. We'll start with education first, if you don't mind.
So I think absolutely. And I think, having membership development that sort of sees members sort of, not develop just as they go through university and get their first jobs, but how does that training sort of take them through their whole careers? And I would like to see a very much joined up approach around how people sort of think about continual professional development across the breadth of their careers, how they think about how skills can be transferred from one part of industry to another, not just the energy industry, but other sectors. And how we do that in a really joined up way. I think there's an element of, we can't train everybody on everything. So where do we have the core competencies and the expertise, and where do our members, where are they seeking training that isn't available elsewhere? I think those are the questions we're sort of wrestling with at the moment. Too early to say what that looks like, but again, the energy transition will be at the absolute heart of that. You're right, the energy industry isn't all about engineers, but engineers will be absolutely at the heart of the energy transition for forever. But I think how we become relevant to people who maybe don't have an engineering background is something that I'm keen to explore. how we allow people to sort of see the adjacencies of the skills they built up. So, in the renewable sector has a very different sort of skill set around financing to oil and gas. So how do we sort of bring people maybe from outside of the energy industry who've got financing skills or permitting skills that are relevant into the energy industry, and sort of see that knowledge transfer being highly relevant. So you don't need to have worked in the energy industry to bring really relevant skills.
And you've got the big, I suppose, transition is probably the most famous thing you do is IPweek, which is now no longer IPweek. Explain more.
Well, the week is still going ahead, you'll be glad to know. In February of next year, we'll be having two very high quality virtual events, so we can include people from all over the world. And then on the third day, we will be having a face-to-face event here in London, and hopefully a few satellite events elsewhere. We are renaming it. We will be calling it International Energy Week, which really reflects the content that we've had for a number of years at that conference. And I think this is really just a reflection of the broad industry that engage and participate in that conference. So you should expect the usual high quality, engaging topics, speakers, and really a new name and a new format that blends the best of the virtual world with the physical world. And I think people want both. And if we can bring the two of those together in the right way, I'm really looking forward to what should be the first major energy event post COP26 later this year.
Do you think that you said that you saw the convergence? We always talk about oil and gas, and we talk about sort of renewables. Where does the nuclear part of things come in? Because I'm sure you have members who are part of the nuclear industry. There's a big call for, that should be expanded if we really want to get to our accelerated net zero target, and it's vital for it. For your members who might be in that sector, are you saying that you're welcome as well? We want to hear that view. What's your personal take on that?
Absolutely, and nuclear today is a big part of the energy mix here in the UK and in many other economies around the world. It will continue to be a big part of the energy mix. It's not for us to sort of opine on what the winners around energy solutions should be, but where we can really help is around the integration. And so as we think about green hydrogen, there are projects being developed at the moment that are looking at sort of taking green hydrogen from nuclear as another energy vector. So this is not about us, making choices. It's about us supporting energy professionals and the broader industry and society around how we best develop those energy resources.
And before we end, a couple of quick points. Where's the public in all this? Do you see the Energy Institute as still very much a member organisation for people in energy? Or do you feel there's some sort of perhaps role for you to try and get involved in the public side of things, the public debate? And we're all consumers, we'll probably all be going to have electric cars, and so we'll be relating to the energy sector far more than we did 10, 20 years ago.
I think for many, many decades, energy has just been there. You flick the switch, the light comes on. Consumers haven't really thought about it. I think one of the things that changes people's behaviours and how they interact with technology, with energy, is when they buy an EV for the first time. And whilst they're very happy to see their petrol bills go down to zero, what they often see is their electricity bills, double or some multiple of where they were before. And that is when they begin to really engage in a very different way. And that will play out in different ways for different consumers as consumers engage with heat pumps or other forms of technology. And to me, the energy system, although the mix of energy has changed dramatically over the last few decades here in the UK, but over the last 100 years has certainly changed, the way that energy actually gets from generation into the home and how it is consumed fundamentally hasn't changed. And as digital technologies play a bigger role, I think consumers are going to become more engaged. It's not the most engaging subject for many people, but I think we've yet to go through that sort of massive digitization we've seen in other industries within the energy sector. That is beginning to happen. The early adopters are there, but the general members of the public aren't there. So I think, we do have a role as the Energy Institute to help educate. We publish a lot of sort of reports around things like hydrogen, CCUS. They're intended as educational tools for people to understand the energy sector. And I would also like us to sort of think about how we engage younger members of society, future engineers, future energy professionals, and get a far more diverse mix of people. Because one thing we haven't talked about is the diversity mix in the energy sector, which, you know, throughout my career has been a long way from where it should be, and even today has an awful long way to go. And I think by engaging people when they're young in what energy means, what impact it has on society, and how we can make a difference around reaching net zero, and energy is clearly one of the biggest areas in order to achieve net zero, then I think, you know, I feel very optimistic that we can bring through the next generation of energy leaders into the sector.
And my last question for your members who are watching this, what's your message to them?
I think, yeah, engage with us. You know, we value all of the input. Many of you volunteer for us through various committees, through all sorts of branch events around the world, and so thank you for that. We want to hear from you as we enter into this next phase of our strategy, and as we look out to 2030 and beyond. We want to hear what you think. You know, we are going to lead as the Energy Institute around the transition, but that means, you know, we need to listen to the expertise, the knowledge, the different perspectives of all of our members. And so, you know, I publicly have my email out there. We're on LinkedIn, we're on other forms of social media. So just engage with us, tell us what you think, and you know, we would really value that input.
Nick, all the best with your future as leader of the Energy Institute.
Thank you, Sumit. Really good talking with you.
Brilliant. Thanks for your time.